Drama is afoot with CIG announcing that in the upcoming patch, currently testing on the PTU, that all med beds will allow players to respawn from them, including the Pisces Rescue, Cutlass Red, which previously had the ability to respawn and then later had it removed, and the upcoming Ursa Medevac, aka the Nursa rover. Which, let's not beat around the bush, that's why they're making this change now, so that they have a new must-have vehicle for Invictus. This is being met with an extremely mixed response, with some people loving it and others absolutely hating it. For the sake of fairness though, I'm going to come at this with as little bias as possible. I've spent all day going through posts about it on Spectrum, and so I'm going to explain to you all the arguments for and against the changes, how it can potentially impact missions, events, and how professions work. And finally, I'll share a bunch of ideas as to how things could be changed in order to help address these concerns and balance it a bit better. And let's make a deal. If by the end of this you don't feel the urge to yell at me, you have to like and subscribe. Otherwise, let it rip in the comments below and I'll take it like a man. Alright, well, my name's Dead Leader and let's jump into it. Now, just a quick first note to acknowledge that yes, this isn't the final iteration of how respawning and medbeds will work in Star Citizen, and that a lot of the ideas talked about have previously already been mentioned by CIG in the past before. The purpose of this video is to discuss how these changes potentially affect the game in its current form and state of development, and to look at how things could be further implemented going forward. So, to start, here's the patch note that started this whole discussion. Medical Bed Rescue Update. With the release of 3.23.1, we wanted to provide players with a less brutal experience when getting back into action. To help with this, we are making all medical bed tiers be capable of being set as a regen location. The range at which you will be able to respawn in them will depend on the size class. Tier 3 medical beds will allow respawning up to 20 kilometers away. Tier 2 medical beds, which previously allowed respawning up to 20 kilometers, will now allow respawning up to 50 kilometers away. I actually didn't know that. Is that like a new thing? Did they add that recently? Because I swear the character could do it from anywhere, but now I think I've just been delusional. Anyway, now, a lot of people, especially if you're new to the game, saw this and likely were like, oh, sweet, that'll make things easier for me. But a lot of the pushback comes from people who enjoy the medical gameplay in Star Citizen, which has needed some attention for a long while now, and they fear that making the ability for everyone to respawn easier without help makes death less of a punishing risk, which effectively could gut the medical gameplay that's there now, making it become more shallow with people opting to just backspace and respawn than participate in requesting medical help from a beacon. If there's less consequences for dying, then life is worth less. But many also correctly have stated that if the punishment for dying is as shallow as you needing to waste your time more on a tram and doing repetitive, unnecessary tasks in the central business district just to get back to some actual gameplay, then potentially the punishment was never good in the first place, making the real issue less about should people be able to respawn on their ships, and more how else can CIG make death have more consequence in other ways. There's also concern that it will make spawn camping likely more common, with more ships potentially able to now have respawn points inside of them, because if someone was to say hijack a ship for a good old bit of old-fashioned piracy, if they killed the crew or stole the ship while they were absent, they would still respawn back into the ship over and over, leaving the pirate no option but to continually kill the player respawning over and over again. Which this was the center of a hotly debated drama last year, where the same thing happened in a Carrack medbay, with the pirates being the ones who ultimately got in trouble for what was classed as griefing, even though what were they supposed to do? Let them take a gun out and just kill them? And by the same token, what was the respawning player supposed to do? Since it was their respawn point, they had no option to not respawn there, making the game unplayable for them until the pirates had moved on. They should probably make an option for you to respawn at your starting location if you die too many times in quick succession, to be honest, just saying. There's also the fear that criminals won't need to respawn at Grimhex as punishment as often, with the limitation of only being able to respawn there being one of the core mechanisms of self-regulating piracy and griefing outside of the prison mechanic. Knowing that if you defeat a criminal, at least they, depending on where you are, would be sent potentially far away, or at least somewhere you could count on, giving you time to leave the area if you need to. People are also worried that dedicated medical ships coming in the future, such as the Apollo, would lose their purpose if the primary function can be performed by a much cheaper and smaller ship that could be stowed away in a better, more powerful ship's hangar. But as I said earlier, many people aren't so fussed with such concerns and see the change as something that adds a massive amount of quality of life, since it helps cut out a lot of arduous travel time if they prepare for it. It could potentially inspire bigger player-driven battles to naturally take place, allowing more people to gather on an area such as Ghost Hollow or Jumptown. And what would those missions be like if they did become bigger hot zones of action? And for many, that's an exciting possibility. Previous respawn ships were large, laborious to move around, and very expensive, both in and out of game, making the ability to have a personal respawn point something that could be seen as paywalled to most players, and that these changes actually added value to cheaper and more commonly available ships such as the C8R and Cuddy Red. And with the new physical inventory and freight elevator changes, spending some more time to prepare and load your ship up with supplies means when you do head out on a mission with a respawn point, it gives you more reason to be prepared with multiple gear sets on board and more reason to bother loading ships in general, since respawning is of no use if you don't have a spacesuit or guns to do anything with, which in turn means investigating player crash sites, bounty hunting, and piracy will have a higher chance of actually being worth it over how it is now, with people often just piloting with an empty inventory with nothing but a sperm suit equipped. Vehicles like the Nurser also potentially gives more depth to ground vehicle gameplay. For a long time, people kind of just shrug off ground vehicles, seeing them as more toys in game, with not much real point in actually using them. But if you're now respawning in a ground vehicle somewhere, you're likely going to need other ground vehicles to actually get you back to the place where you died, as since 3.23 came out, you actively lose oxygen levels when you're outside of a vehicle or building, and from my tests, you can only make it about 7 kilometers before you run out of breathable air and just die. It also makes it much easier to retrieve your gear when you die. I've lost count of times where I'll die somewhere far from a respawn point, take 20 to 30 minutes to ready myself up again with gear, get back there only to die again for some stupid reason I had no control of, and have to do the whole thing over again. But by then, you feel it's too much effort to bother do it all over again for the initial reasons, but you've already lost so much stuff in both times trying to get back there that there's a sunk cost fallacy where you've already lost so much gear from previous attempts that you're trying to just get some back to break even. Also, things break less when you don't have to load them in and out of a game. It almost feels like it's more often than not that you'll load into an area where you died, only to be witness to your corpse phasing through the planet mesh and falling to the planet's core, lost forever, wasting your gear and your time it took trying to even retrieve it. And as I said earlier, the medical gameplay has needed a lot of work for a long time, with many players actually fearing asking for a rescue without a better reputation system in place in the game, with many people afraid that their rescuer may end up being their executioner, and that these changes mean less lying on the ground waiting for someone to potentially never even come for you. Now we get to the ideas part of changes to the balancing that could make this a lot better for everyone potentially. And some of these are things that CIG themselves have said is coming eventually. So take that as you will. Like implementing a limit on a number of respawns a vehicle can provide at a time. Logically, like every other resource on a ship, there should be a finite amount of the human juice that they use when cloning a human during the respawn process. So it makes sense that, like with ammunition and fuel, it's something that should run out and be recharged at a landing pad, making when and how you use it something that you need to take into consideration and would stop infinite spawn camping from taking place. Quantum dampeners could be made to block respawning, and EMPs should be able to shut down respawning for a time period. This would help add more gameplay options, with people having a potential counter to the problem of the enemy respawning and giving them a clear counter to the counter. Damaging components on a vehicle with a medbed to disable respawning. This would give pirates a clear and achievable objective to counter infinite respawning, so they don't need to spawn camp, avoiding the great respawn drama of 2023, and plays perfectly well with the upcoming resource management gameplay being introduced. They could make it so that players could clear the respawn from a player's medical terminal if they board your vehicle, or use a Tiger Claw to sabotage respawns, potentially shutting down its ability to respawn until mended. They could make it so that one bed can only be set to one or maybe just a few players to respawn at, so you don't have a clown car situation happening. This would make it less likely to have any zerging issues, since for everyone in a large crew to respawn, they would need to do more preparation, and people are less likely to fully load a bunch of vehicles into a ship before they go out. And if they do all that work, then that preparation should yield a better payoff and survivability. They could institute a respawn cooldown on medbeds. If there was a 10-minute respawn cooldown, it would give players an active reason to still consider calling for assistance, even if they have brought a medbed along with them. Now, they could straight up just fix medical beacon reputation. On the call for medical help or die screen, they could show the number of players with good rep that are on your server currently, so you can make an educated choice. So players that don't even have a med bed, I have more confidence in placing a rescue beacon down where they would normally just backspace away, like I know a lot of people do. Low-level med beds could respawn you as you are, with injuries to your extremities, but health replenish to whatever your limit is with those injuries, where high-level med beds could respawn you fully fresh. Or they could make it so that lower-tier med beds require medical terminals to be manned to activate the respawn, giving players more reason to still use a rescue beacon or to not go out alone in the first place. Really, any of these changes could be mixed and matched together, and I think it would go a long way with players, since it would still add a degree of the quality of life that the game does need, and it could still provide more interesting and dynamic gameplay in terms of using the medbeds and countering them at the same time, rather than just purely making things easier by simplifying gameplay. I think ultimately the goal should be, when you introduce a new mechanic or change like this, you should look at the game at making sure that it's adding gameplay, it's adding something new, it's adding tactics or the ability to enjoy it more, instead of taking things away and making things harder for other things to move forward. So yeah, look, I hope it doesn't affect people that enjoy medical gameplay too much as they're worrying about now. You know, maybe that's not even going to be a thing. I think it's very rare that people actually really bother to load up ships with other vehicles. Like, if you're listening to this and you do, you're probably like, excuse me, I always do that. But, you know, not everyone does. So hopefully it doesn't affect it in the amount that people are worried about. And, you know, it will be interesting to see how other aspects of the game, even just for the time being, like, are changed by this. Like, what's the flow of a session playing Star Citizen going to be like if you can kind of cut out a lot of, you know, the sitting on trams and the kind of, you know, slow quantum jumps from here and there. Like, you know, it might really spice up and change some of the gameplay that's already there in a really positive way, for all you know. So look, I'm interested in seeing what happens, but I really do think that the worries of people that are interested into the medical gameplay does need to be taken into consideration, because it is a massive kind of part of Star Citizen, and without there being requests for help from other actual players, it's not in Star Citizen anymore. So they're right to be worried. All right, well, that's just a rant I had to get out of the way. Thanks for spending the time being here. As usual, my name's Dead Leader, and I'll see you in the verse.
デッドリーダー